The heat in Mobile did not fall with the sun. It clung to the bricks of the city, rose in shimmering waves from the cobblestones, and settled deep in the lungs like a fever. In the grand house on Government Street, the air was a thick, sweet poison, long before Evelyn crushed the oleander leaves. It was the scent of wilting magnolias, of dust motes dancing in the slanting evening light, of Isadora Beaumont's lavender water, warring with the faint, cloying smell of sickness that clung to her silks. Evelyn stood behind her mistress's chaise longue, a ghost in gray linen, her presence as essential and as unremarked as the air itself. Her hands, long-fingered and capable, were still. Only her eyes moved, tracing the path of a lone mosquito as it whined its way toward the pale, blue-veined skin of Isadora's throat. She did not raise a hand to wave it away. She watched, a silent observer, in a war of small things. "The tea is weak, Evelyn," Isadora said, her voice a fragile rasp. She did not turn her head. Her gaze was fixed on her own reflection in a silver-backed hand mirror, a beautiful, tragic mask of a face framed by sweat-dampened auburn curls. "It tastes of nothing, of dishwater and disappointment, just like this entire day." "Yes, ma'am," Evelyn murmured. Her own voice was a low, quiet thing, a sound sanded smooth by years of practiced acquiescence. She had 1,000 answers she could give, a universe of replies locked behind her teeth. "I brewed it just as you like it. The same Ceylon leaves, the same silver pot, steeped for the same 3 minutes you time with your father's pocket watch." But the only answer that existed in this room was, "Yes, ma'am." Isadora sighed, a theatrical exhalation of suffering that stirred the humid air. "My nerves are shattered. Utterly shattered. Mr. Beaumont is in his study with his ledgers again, counting his profits from other men's sweat. The city stinks. And you bring me this flavorless water." She placed the mirror on the velvet cushion beside her, the silver flashing. "Take it away. Brew it again. And this time, try to remember that you are not preparing sustenance for a field hand. You are preparing a restorative for a lady of delicate constitution." Evelyn's fingers curled, just for a second, the knuckles pressing white against her dark skin, before she forced them to relax. She picked up the tray. The porcelain cup rattled faintly against its saucer, a sound like chattering teeth. As she turned, Isadora's voice, sharp and sudden as a needle, pinned her in place. "And Evelyn?" Evelyn stopped, her back to the chaise. "The hummingbird brooch. Where is it?" Evelyn's hand instinctively went to her collar. The small, enameled bird was not there. She had taken it off to scrub the floors, afraid the lye would tarnish the cheap metal, the chips of colored glass that passed for jewels. I set it aside, ma'am, for safekeeping." "It was a gift," Isadora said, her voice dropping into a register of wounded intimacy that was far more dangerous than her anger. "A token of my affection. When you wear it, it reminds me that there can be beauty even in the most humble of things. It reminds me that you are shopping in Tourburg. Do you understand? I do not like to be reminded of ugliness. Fetch it. And do not let me see you without it again." "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn walked from the room, her spine straight, her steps measured. The long hall was a cavern of shadows, the portraits of Beaumont ancestors watching her with flat, painted eyes. She did not go to her small pallet of a room to fetch the brooch. She went to the back of the house, to the steamy heat of the detached kitchen where old Hestia was kneading dough for the morning's bread, her broad back a study in resilience. The air here was different. It smelled of yeast and wood smoke, of life. Hestia didn't look up. "She at it again?" Evelyn placed the tray on the scrubbed pine table. "The tea is weak. Her nerves are shattered. The world is ending because a cloud passed in front of the sun." Hestia grunted, punching the dough with a rhythmic, powerful thud. That woman would find fault with the Lord's own manna. What'd she do this time? The brooch. The kneading stopped. Hestia turned, her face a mask of weary wisdom, her eyes dark and deep as a well. The little bird. It wasn't a question. Everyone knew about the brooch. It was a cage. Evelyn wore on her collar a constant glittering reminder of her place. A gift that was not a gift, but a brand. Evelyn looked down at the teapot. The last of the pale, useless tea swirled within. Tastes of nothing, Isadora had said. Evelyn thought of the book. It was hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her room, a slim volume bound in cracked leather she'd stolen from the master's library. An illustrated compendium of southern flora. Mr. Beaumont had no use for it. He cared only for ledgers and books on cotton futures. Isadora had taught Evelyn to read years ago, in a fit of fashionable benevolence, treating her like a clever pet. She had taught her the shapes of letters, the magic of words, and in doing so, had armed her with the very weapon that would be her undoing. Evelyn had not been looking for poison. She had been looking for beauty, for a world beyond the suffocating confines of the Beaumont house. She'd learned the names of flowers she'd known all her life by sight and scent. Jasmine, wisteria, gardenia. And then she had turned a page and seen it. A delicate spray of pink and white flowers, lush green leaves. Nerium oleander. The illustration was beautiful. The text beneath it was a revelation. Nigher highly toxic in all its parts. Ingestion causes nausea, vertigo, a slowing of the heart, and finally, death. The ancient Romans knew it as a subtle and effective poison. It is said its bitterness can be masked with sufficient honey or sugar. Evelyn looked at Hestia. She told Samuel today, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, though they were alone. She told him if he tracked mud on the Aubusson carpet one more time, she would have the master sell him to the traders in New Orleans. She said it with a smile. She told him he'd look handsome on an auction block. Samuel was Hestia's grandson, a boy of 10, with eyes that still held the light of innocence, a light Evelyn felt it was her sacred duty to protect. He was the only thing in this house she truly loved. Hestia's face hardened, the soft lines of age turning to granite. She wiped her flowery hands on her apron. She's a snake with a pretty face, that one. Cries about her nerves while she sits on a throne of our bones. Evelyn picked up the porcelain cup, her thumb tracing its gilded rim. It was so fragile, it would shatter if she simply closed her fist. A snake can be charmed, Evelyn said, her voice so low Hestia had to lean in to hear. Or it can be killed. The old woman's eyes widened. For a long moment the only sounds were the crickets starting their nightly chorus and the far-off clang of a ship's bell from the port. Hestia reached out and placed a warm, flower-dusted hand over Evelyn's. Her touch was firm, a silent anchor. The Lord says, "Vengeance is mine," Hestia whispered, her voice rough with a fear Evelyn had never heard in it before. Evelyn met her gaze. "The Lord is not here, Hestia, but I am." She left the kitchen and walked out into the falling dusk. The air was cooling slightly, carrying the scent of salt and damp earth from the bay. She moved toward the back of the garden, past the orderly rows of roses and camellias that Isadora loved, to the wilder edge of the property where a line of oleander bushes grew, a thick, glossy hedge planted to hide the ugliness of the alley beyond. Their flowers, a riot of pink and white in the twilight, looked innocent, even cheerful. Evelyn reached out and plucked a single, perfect leaf. It was smooth and leathery, cool against her palm. She looked back at the house. The windows were beginning to glow with lamplight. One of them was Isadora's bedroom, her prison of silks and sorrows. From this distance it looked warm, inviting, a beacon of civilization. But Evelyn knew what it was. It was a tomb, and Isadora was not its only occupant. She closed her hand around the leaf, its sharp edges digging into her skin. She was not a field hand. She was preparing a restorative. The next 3 days were a torment of waiting, a slow, agonizing stretching of time. Evelyn moved through her duties in a state of heightened awareness, every sense screaming. The house, once a familiar prison, was now a landscape of threats. A creaking floorboard was an accusation. A questioning glance from Mr. Beaumont was a sentence. The clink of a spoon was the tolling of a bell. She wore the hummingbird brooch, pinned tightly to her collar, its cold metal a billet, constant reminder against her skin. Isadora, pleased by her obedience, was in a period of placid fragility. Her cruelty softened to a weary condescension. Evelyn had steeped the leaves in a small pot of water, hidden in the coolest corner of the smokehouse. The resulting liquid a pale greenish brown, smelling faintly of almonds and damp earth. She kept it in a small glass vial, stoppered with cork, tucked into the waistband of her dress. It felt like a shard of ice against her skin, a cold promise. She told herself it was for Samuel. She pictured his face, the way his eyes lit up when she snuck him a molasses cookie, the feel of his small, trusting hand in hers. When Isadora looked at him, she saw a piece of property, a thing to be polished or disposed of. When Evelyn looked at him, she saw a future, a fragile hope, that deserved to grow in the sun. The thought of him on an auction block, his light extinguished by fear, was a physical pain, a fire in her gut that burned away all doubt. But it was not just for Samuel. In the dead of night, lying on her thin pallet, listening to the house settle around her, Evelyn admitted the deeper truth to herself. This was for her. For the girl who had been taught to read and then forbidden to hold a book in the parlor. For the woman whose hair had been praised and then threatened with shears in the same breath. For the human being who had been made to feel like a piece of furniture, an object whose only purpose was to reflect the moods of another. It was for every "yes, ma'am" that had meant "I hate you," every smile that had hidden a scream, every silent moment of service that was a lifetime of subjugation. This act, this terrible final act, was the only thing in her entire life that she had truly chosen for herself. It was a declaration of existence. Kommst du? I am here. I am real. And I will not be erased. The day she chose was a Sunday. Mr. Beaumont was at his club, discussing politics and cotton prices with other men who owned the world. The other house staff had been given the afternoon off, a rare respite. Only she, Hestia, and Samuel were on the property. Hestia was in the quarters, humming a low spiritual as she mended Samuel's only shirt. Samuel was somewhere near the stables, likely trying to coax the surly old tomcat into friendship. The house was quiet, steeped in the oppressive afternoon heat. Isadora had taken to her bed, complaining of a migraine. The shutters were drawn, casting the room in a striped, submarine gloom. She lay against a mountain of lace-trimmed pillows, a cloth soaked in rosewater pressed to her forehead. "Evelyn," she called, her voice a weak thread of sound. "My throat is parched. Bring me my tea, and put a little honey in it, a good amount. My head is pounding so." Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. This was it. The moment had arrived, not in a storm of fury, but in a quiet, sickly room. She stood in the doorway, her hands trembling so hard she clasped them behind her back. "Yes, ma'am," she said. The words came out steady. She was surprised by her own voice. In the kitchen, her movements were precise, economical. She boiled the water. She warmed the silver pot. She measured the Ceylon leaves. Her hands had stopped shaking. A strange, cold calm had settled over her. It felt like standing at the center of a hurricane. The world was chaos, but in her small circle of action, there was only purpose. She poured the steaming water over the leaves, the fragrant steam rising to mist her face. She let it steep. 3 minutes. She watched the sand fall through Isadora's little hourglass timer. Then she unstoppered the vial. The pale green liquid trickled into the pot, disappearing into the dark tea without a trace. It was done. She stirred in 2 heaping spoonfuls of honey from the comb, the golden syrup dissolving, masking any bitterness, sweetening the sentence of death. She arranged the tray, the pot, the delicate porcelain cup with its painted rosebuds, the small pitcher of cream, the bowl of sugar cubes, the silver spoon. It was a ritual she had performed 1,000 times, a ritual of service. Today it was a ritual of liberation. As she carried the tray down the hall, the house was utterly silent. She could hear the blood pulsing in her ears. The portraits on the wall seemed to watch her pass, their expressions grim, judgmental. She did not look at them. She looked at the tray, at the steam rising from the spout of the silver pot. She entered the bedroom without knocking, as she was expected to. Isadora's eyes fluttered open. "Ah," she breathed. "You were quick." "I didn't want you to wait, ma'am," Evelyn said, her voice soft. She set the tray on the bedside table. Her hands were steady as she poured the tea. It was a rich amber color. It smelled of bergamot and honey. It smelled of home and comfort and murder. Isadora pushed herself up slightly on her pillows. "Bring it here." "My hand is too unsteady to reach." Evelyn picked up the cup and saucer. Her reflection wavered in the dark liquid. For a second, she saw a monster. Then the image cleared, and she saw only her own face, her eyes wide and dark. She held the cup out to her mistress. Their fingers brushed as Isadora took it. The touch was like a spark of lightning, a jolt that seemed to travel up Evelyn's arm and into her heart. Isadora's skin was cool and dry, like old paper. "You've made it just right," Isadora said, taking a small, exploratory sip. She closed her eyes. "The honey, it's perfect, you see? You can do things properly when you apply yourself." Evelyn stood by the bed, her hands clasped at her waist, a statue of servitude. She watched Isadora drink. She watched the level of the dark liquid in the cup go down, sip by sip. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked, a sound as loud and inexorable as a drumbeat marching to an execution. "It is strange," Isadora said, halfway through the cup. She frowned, a little crease appearing between her brows. "There is a peculiar aftertaste, like almonds almost. Did Hestia bake today?" "Yes, ma'am. She made almond cakes for tomorrow." The lie came easily, a smooth, polished stone. "That must be it." Isadora took another larger drink, and then set the cup down on the saucer with a clatter. She pressed a hand to her stomach. "Oh, my head! It's suddenly so much worse. I feel dizzy." Evelyn did not move. She watched as a sheen of sweat broke out on Isadora's forehead. Her breathing grew shallow, ragged. "Evelyn!" Isadora's voice was thin, laced with a new, sharp thread of fear. She looked at Evelyn, really looked at her, for the first time all day. Her eyes widened, the blue irises dilating with a slow, dawning horror. "What? What did you?" She tried to push herself up, but her limbs seemed to have lost their strength. Her hand, reaching for the bell pull, fell limply onto the coverlet. "The tea," she gasped, her face contorting. "The tea. It's bitter." Evelyn took a single step back from the bed. She said nothing. Her silence was a confession, an accusation, a verdict. In that moment, the power in the room shifted. The mistress on her pillows was helpless, dying. The slave by the bed was the master of fate, a dark angel of retribution. Isadora's eyes, wide with terror and disbelief, were locked on Evelyn's. She was seeing her for the first time not as a pair of hands, not as a reflection of her own needs, but as a person, a separate being with a will and a heart full of secrets. And in that final, terrible moment of clarity, she saw the truth. Her mouth opened, but only a choked, gurgling sound came out. Her body arched, a silent, agonizing spasm, and then she fell back against the pillows, her eyes still open, fixed on the canopy above her bed, as if seeing some dreadful vision there. The porcelain cup slipped from her grasp and shattered on the floor, the last of the sweetened poison spreading like a dark stain on the pale wood. The clock on the mantelpiece continued to tick. For a full minute, Evelyn did not move. She stood in the echoing silence of the room, listening to the sound of her own breathing. She was alive. Isadora Beaumont was not. The world had not ended. The sun still streamed in stripes through the shutters. A bee buzzed against the window pane. Everything was the same, and everything was different. Then, the cold calm shattered, and a terror more profound than any she had ever known washed over her. It was the terror of the irrevocable, the terror of the abyss that had just opened up beneath her feet. She had not just killed a woman, she had killed a white woman. She had not just committed murder, she had committed an act of war against their entire world, and the retribution would be swift and biblical. Her flight was not a panicked scramble, but a series of deliberate, rehearsed actions. She backed out of the room, pulling the door quietly shut. She walked, not ran, down the hallway. Her mind was a maelstrom, but her body remembered the plan she had drilled into it during those long, sleepless nights. In her small room, she pulled on a second dress over her first, and a sturdy pair of boots she had stolen from the stable boy. She took the small cloth bundle that was already packed, a wedge of hard cheese, a hunk of Hestia's bread, and the few coins she had saved over the years, pennies and dimes earned from selling herbs to the cook. She reached under the floorboard for the book, Yonzen Illustrated Compendium of Southern Flora. Her first instinct was to leave it, to burn it. But it was the key, the weapon, the source of her terrible knowledge. She tucked it into her bundle. It was a part of her now. She went to her little shelf and picked up the hummingbird brooch. For a moment, she held the glittering, enameled thing in her palm. It felt heavy, a weight of years of small humiliations. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed it onto her empty pallet. It landed with a soft, dull thud, a final, silent act of defiance. She found Hestia in the yard, scattering feed for the chickens, Samuel at her side. The old woman looked up, and her eyes, reading Evelyn's face, widened with a terrible understanding. The question was there, unspoken. Evelyn gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Hestia's face crumpled for a second, a mask of grief and fear, but then she straightened her spine, her expression hardening into resolve. She pulled Evelyn into a fierce, brief hug that smelled of flour and wood smoke. "Go north, child," she whispered, her voice a low, urgent rumble. "Follow the drinking gourd. Don't you stop for nothing. And nobody. You hear me? Don't you ever stop." She pressed something hard and round into Evelyn's hand. It was a compass, small and brass, that had belonged to her husband, a free man who had worked the docks before he was lost to the fever. "It knows the way," Hestia said. Evelyn knelt and put her arms around Samuel. The boy hugged her back tightly, his face buried in her shoulder. He didn't understand what was happening, only that the air was thick with a grown-up fear he could taste. "You be good, little bird," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "You be a good boy for your grandma." She pulled away before he could see her cry. She gave Hestia one last look, a look that conveyed a universe of gratitude, of sorrow, of shared history. Then she turned and walked, not ran, toward the back gate, toward the alley, toward the labyrinthine streets of Mobile that led down to the river. As she slipped into the alley, the setting sun cast her shadow long before her, a dark, fleeting shape against the brick. The air was thick with the evening smells of the city, coal smoke, roasting oysters, the brackish tang of the bay. She could hear the distant sounds of life, a cart rumbling over cobblestones, a vendor calling his wares, the laughter of children. It was a world that was utterly oblivious to the quiet, cataclysmic event that had just occurred in the grand house on Government Street. She was a ghost now, moving through the twilight. The vial in her waistband was empty, but she could still feel its cold weight against her skin. She had traded one kind of prison for another. Before, she had been caged in a house. Now her prison was the entire South. Every face was a potential enemy, every barking dog a threat, every open field a killing ground. Her destination was the wharf, and a man named Silas, a free man of color who loaded cotton bales by day and ferried a different kind of cargo by night. Hestia had given her the name in a hushed whisper weeks ago, a dangerous secret passed from one trusted soul to another. He was a link in a chain that stretched 1,000 miles north, a chain forged of courage and desperation, the railroad that ran on whispers and moved in darkness. Finding him was a nightmare of shadows and fear. The wharf was a chaotic world of its own, a forest of masts and rigging, smelling of tar and fish and the raw, earthy scent of cotton. White sailors, drunk and loud, staggered from grog shops. Overseers with cruel, watchful eyes patrolled the docks. Evelyn kept to the deepest shadows, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She was a needle in a haystack, and the whole world was a magnet bent on finding her. She found him by the coded phrase Hestia had taught her. "I'm looking for a friend," she said to the big man with scars on his arms and eyes that held a weary, defiant intelligence. "A friend who is traveling north." Silas looked her up and down, his gaze missing nothing. He saw the terror in her eyes, but he also saw the steel beneath it. He saw the house slave's dress and the calloused hands that didn't quite match. He was a connoisseur of desperation. "The journey is hard," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The river is long, and the price is steep." "I have this," she said, showing him the handful of coins. He barely glanced at them. "The price is not paid in coin. It is paid in silence, in stillness." "Can you be silent? Can you be as still as death itself?" She thought of the room she had just left, of the still, silent figure on the bed. "Yes," she said. He led her not to a boat, but to a stack of empty cotton barrels waiting to be loaded onto a northbound paddle steamer. He pointed to one. "Get in. Do not make a sound. Not if you hear men walking. Not if you hear dogs barking. Not if a rat crawls over your face. You are cargo now. Less than cargo. You are a secret. And secrets that make noise don't stay secret for long." The barrel was cramped and suffocating. It smelled of raw cotton and something else, the faint, lingering scent of the human fear of those who had come before her. The lid was placed over the top, plunging her into absolute, terrifying blackness. She heard the scrape of it being moved, the groan of ropes, the shouts of men. Then the heavy, jarring thud as it was loaded into the cargo hold. Time ceased to exist. There was only the darkness, the suffocating heat, the rocking of the boat, and the constant, thrumming vibration of the steam engine that resonated through the wood and into her bones. She curled into a tight ball, her bundle clutched to her chest. She thought of Samuel and Hestia, praying for their safety. She pictured Isadora's face in that last moment, the shocked, betrayed horror in her eyes. The image did not bring her triumph, only a cold, hollow ache. She had freed herself, but she had damned herself in the process. She was both liberator and murderer, victim and villain. The two were tangled inside her now, inseparable. Hours, or maybe days, later. She couldn't tell. The lid was lifted. The sudden light was blinding. Silas's face was above her, a dark moon in a sky of gray dawn. "Ohio River," he grunted. "This is as far as I go. Get out, move fast." He pointed her to a man waiting by the shore, a gaunt, grim-faced Quaker farmer with a wagon full of hay. There was no conversation, just a shared look of understanding and risk. She was hidden under the scratchy, sweet-smelling hay, another secret passed along the chain. The journey north was a fever dream, a blur of terrifying nights and suffocating days. She hid in cellars that smelled of damp earth and rotting apples, in secret compartments behind fireplaces, in the attics of brave, God-fearing people who risked their own lives and freedom for a stranger. She was passed from hand to hand, a piece of contraband freight on the Liberty Line. She learned to live on whispers, to read the language of a glance, to distinguish the sound of a friend's knock from a foe's. She traveled through the dark woods of Kentucky. The compass Hestia had given her a cold, comforting weight in her palm, its needle always pointing north. She waded through icy streams to throw dogs off her scent, the cold water a shock that made her feel brutally, terrifyingly alive. She ate what she was given, cornbread, salt pork, sometimes nothing at all. She learned the geography of fear, the cartography of escape, and she was haunted. In the rustle of leaves, she heard the whisper of Isadora's silks. In the scent of wildflowers, she smelled the cloying sweetness of the funeral magnolias that would have filled the Beaumont house. In her dreams she served tea again and again, the porcelain cup heavy as a stone in her hand, Isadora's blue eyes watching her over the rim, knowing. She rarely spoke, and when she did not use her name. Evelyn was the name of a slave, a ghost she had left behind in a ruined parlor in Mobile. She was no one, a specter moving toward a promised land she wasn't sure she believed in. She learned that freedom was not a place, but a direction. It was the constant, relentless act of moving forward, of putting one foot in front of the other, even when exhaustion and fear screamed at her to stop. She finally crossed into the free state of Ohio, but the fear did not recede. It only changed its shape. The Fugitive Slave Act had given the South long arms. Slave catchers roamed these lands, too, men who saw her not as a person but as a walking piece of property, a reward waiting to be claimed. Freedom was a precarious, conditional thing. In a small, free black community near the Canadian border, she finally allowed herself to rest. A woman named Sarah, a former slave who had bought her own freedom and now ran a safe house, took her in. Sarah was a woman carved from granite and grace. She asked no questions about Evelyn's past. She saw the haunted look in her eyes and understood that some stories were too heavy to be spoken aloud. One cold evening, sitting by the fire in Sarah's kitchen, Evelyn finally took out the book. Its leather cover was warped from damp, its pages stained. She opened it to the illustration of the oleander. The delicate pink and white flowers seemed to mock her from the page. "That's a pretty flower," Sarah said, her voice gentle. "Down south, they call it the rose bay. Some folks plant it to keep the devil away. Some folks, I hear, use it to invite him in." Evelyn's hand trembled as she closed the book. "It's just a flower." Sarah looked at her, her gaze deep and knowing. "Ain't nothing in this world just a thing, child. Everything got its purpose. Everything got its price." The news, when it came, was a month old. A tattered copy of a mobile newspaper used to wrap a parcel. Evelyn saw the headline, and the words seemed to leap off the page and seize her by the throat. Tragic passing of Mrs. Isadora Beaumont. Prominent socialite succumbs to sudden illness. She devoured the article, her heart pounding. The story was a masterpiece of Southern Gothic fiction. Mrs. Beaumont, beloved wife of the esteemed Mr. Charles Beaumont, had passed away after a brief but violent stomach ailment. The city mourned the loss of one of its brightest lights. Her delicate constitution, it was said, had finally given way. There was no mention of poison, no mention of suspicion, but it was the final paragraph that made the blood freeze in her veins. Asterisk. In a related tragedy, it is reported that one of the Beaumont family's most trusted house servants, a Negro girl by the name of Evelyn, vanished on the same day of her mistress's death. It is feared she may have been abducted, or perhaps met with some terrible accident. Mr. Beaumont has offered a substantial reward for any information leading to her safe return. The words were a lie. A silken cord to wrap around her neck. They hadn't suspected her. Or if they had chosen to bury the truth. To admit that a slave had poisoned her mistress was to admit a crack in the very foundation of their world. It was to acknowledge that the quiet, obedient figures in the background were not furniture, but people with thoughts, with rage, with the capacity to bring their gilded world crashing down. It was easier to invent an abduction, to mourn the loss of a treasured possession, than to face the terrifying reality of rebellion in their own homes. But the reward was real. Her face, her description, her skills, they would be on posters, in the mouths of bounty hunters. She was not an anonymous fugitive. She was a named, priced quarry. She was Evelyn of Mobile, and she would be hunted. That night, she burned the book. She watched the pages curl and blacken in Sarah's hearth, the illustration of the oleander dissolving into ash. The fire consumed the evidence of her sin, but it could not touch the memory. That was branded inside her, a part of her soul. She knew she could not stay. Canada was just across the water, a final, desperate leap to a land where the laws of men could not drag her back. Sarah gave her a new name, Grace, and a new history to go with it. She was to be a widow from Virginia, seeking a new life. The last time we see her, it is on a windswept dock at night, waiting for a boat to cross Lake Erie. She is one of several dark figures huddled against the cold, their faces hidden by shadow and fear. Her hair is cut short, and she wears a simple, rough woolen dress, nothing like the gray linen of her former life. She looks older, her face honed by hardship, her eyes holding the deep, weary caution of the hunted. A man approaches her. "Grace," he whispers. She looks up, her eyes scanning the darkness, and for a moment, just a moment, she hesitates. The name is still new, an ill-fitting garment. Then she nods. "I am Grace," she says, and her voice, though quiet, is firm. She follows him toward a small fishing boat, bobbing in the dark water. As she steps onto the deck, she looks back at the shore, at the country that had been her home and her hell. She is leaving behind everything she has ever known. The oppressive heat, the scent of magnolias, the ghost of a woman in a lace-trimmed bed, the memory of a little boy she loved like a brother, the name she was given at birth. The boat pushes off into the black, choppy water. The lights of the American shore grow smaller and smaller, until they are just a handful of scattered, indifferent stars. She pulls her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, the cold wind whipping at her face, tasting of open water and an uncertain future. Is this freedom? This cold, this darkness, this utter solitude? She does not know. She only knows that it is north, and for now, that has to be enough. The boat disappears into the vast, dark expanse of the lake. The water keeps its secrets. Asterisk, asterisk, epilogue. Dr. Eris Thorne adjusted his spectacles and leaned closer to the microfilm reader, the hum of the machine a familiar comfort in the quiet of the mobile municipal archives. It was 2023, and the past was a ghost that lived in glowing green text. For years, Thorne, a professor of Southern history with a penchant for forgotten stories, had been chasing a whisper, a local legend that persisted in the city's black community like a stubborn root. The story of a house slave who had poisoned her mistress and vanished like smoke. Official records were a dead end. Isadora Beaumont's death certificate listed gastric fever as the cause. Her obituary was a confection of sentimental prose. Charles Beaumont's journals, miraculously preserved, spoke only of his profound grief, and the mysterious tragic loss of his wife and his most loyal servant on the same day. He never remarried. The Beaumont line died with him, and the grand house on Government Street was sold, torn down in the 1920s to make way for a bank. But the legend persisted. Thorne had found it in the footnotes of history, in the oral traditions recorded by WPA writers in the 1930s. The details shifted with each telling. The slave's name was sometimes Evelyn, sometimes Lily, sometimes nothing at all. The mistress was a beautiful monster. The poison was sometimes mushroom, sometimes root, but most often it was the sweet-smelling oleander that still grew wild all over the city. In every version of the story, the girl escaped, a folk hero who had struck a blow against the monster and won her freedom. Thorne's breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a collection of letters from a Philadelphia-based abolitionist society donated to a university library. In a letter dated 1859, a Quaker operative named Elias Vance wrote of a recent arrival from the South, a fugitive woman of quiet demeanor and profound sadness. She calls herself Grace, Vance wrote. She will not speak of her life before, but her eyes hold the shadow of some great and terrible trial. She is literate, a rarity, and carries herself with a stillness that is both unnerving and deeply compelling. She is bound for St. Catharines in Canada West, where a small community of our friends will see to her settlement. I pray she finds peace there, for it is clear she has known none on this earth. There was no more mention of Grace. The trail went cold at the Canadian border, as so many did. Did she make it? Did she build a new life? Did she marry, have children, grow old in the cold northern air? The memory of Mobile's heat, a distant dream. Or did the ghosts of her past prove too heavy a burden? History, so often, is the story of such silences. Thorne leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes. He thought of the woman who called herself Grace, who had once been Evelyn. He tried to imagine her journey, the transformation from a silent servant in a gilded cage to a determined killer, from a hunted fugitive to a free woman in a new land. Her act was, by any legal definition, a murder, but in the profoundly immoral and violent world she inhabited, where human beings were property and a casual threat could extinguish a child's future, what was justice? Was her act one of criminal malice, or was it an act of righteous rebellion, a desperate solitary war waged by the powerless against the powerful? He shut off the microfilm reader, plunging the room back into a comfortable gloom. Outside the archive windows, the modern city of Mobile hummed with life. Tourists ambled down streets named for slave owners, admiring the antebellum architecture, the wrought iron balconies, the ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss. The scent of magnolias still hung heavy in the humid air, a sweet perfume, masking the scent of old ghosts, of secrets buried in the rich, dark soil. The story of Evelyn, or Grace, was not in the official records. It was not a story of dates and documented facts. It was a haunting. It was the question that lingered in the quiet places, a testament to the fact that history is not just what is written down, but also what is whispered, what is remembered, and what is powerful enough to be deliberately forgotten. It was the story of a single, bitter cup of tea, and the vast, immeasurable price of a human soul's refusal to be broken.